Share my little screen here. All right. Well, happy Thursday, everybody. I want to welcome everyone to the ACT-IAC briefing on Zero Trust and give a special shout out actually to our NASCIO members that are joining us today. We have a fun agenda in front of everyone that I'd like to share real quick so you can see what we're coming up to. So we're just going to do some introductions and welcome for the project. We're going to give a quick summary and kind of history on the phases of our Zero Trust projects, phase 1 and 2. And then we'll have a quick discussion with Alper Kerman from NIST on the NCCOE labs and their Zero Trust initiatives that they've begun. Followed by our panel on the perspective of Zero Trust from our state CISOs and CIOs. And then we'll have our reports from the Zero Trust working groups and the individual pieces that go into the details of the projects. To introduce myself, my name is Theodore Gates. I'm a consultant at Cisco Systems. I am the industry project lead for the phase 2 efforts from ACT-IAC. I'm also the communications chair for the cybersecurity community of interest. And to kick us off, it's my great pleasure to actually introduce Dan Jacobs, the Director of Cybersecurity at the GSA Technology Transformation Services Center of Excellence, and a member of the ACT-IAC Cybersecurity Federal Advisory Board to help kick our meeting off here.
Hey, thanks, Teddy. I appreciate the opportunity. Hello, everyone, and thank you very much for participating today. I'm really excited about what we have in store for you, and I think you're really going to enjoy it. I've been privileged to work with a very high-performing, cross-government, cross-industry team of professionals in pursuit of a single goal: to inform decision-making, purchasing decisions for security architecture for our federal partners writ large. With this in mind, our team, comprised of nearly a dozen seasoned private and public sector professionals, set out to provide some answers that mattered to federal CIOs and CISOs. 1 year in and an entire pandemic later, we're here to present our body of work. Let me tell you a little bit about the journey. It started back in July 2018 when we first started the phase 1 working group. The output of that working group was delivered in April 2019, and it was a white paper. And it's important to note that at that time, Zero Trust was well into the hype cycle. Only a few companies offered solutions, and most of what you read about them was loaded with buzzwords. So the working group set out spending a lot of time trying to establish a foundational understanding. We offered contributions to taxonomy. We outlined some fundamental pillars. We did some diagramming with basic Zero Trust architecture, what it might look like, offered some examples, and outlined some advantages, as well as provide a deployment strategy and noted some challenges that we were identifying along the way. And that was about it. And I distinctly remember, and focus on Teddy because he's going to be smiling, when we were talking about what the deliverable looked like, we were kicking around what we would call it. And Teddy was adamant about, we have to stop it at 20 pages. Anything more than 20 pages is in a white paper, you can call it a novel. And the fact of the matter is we just had so much research and so much time and great content. We wound up weighing in at somewhere in the area of like 30 to 35 pages. And we cut heavily. But there was a lot of great information in there. And the response from the community regarding our white paper was overwhelmingly positive. And it practically demanded a phase 2 effort. And I remember suggesting it. I said, hey, why don't we continue this work, because we had so much that we had to cut. I think there's a lot of opportunity here to move forward. And the wonderful folks at ACT-IAC said, hey, that sounds great, Big Mouth. Why don't you do it? And boom, there I am, now the federal sponsor for the phase 2. So after a lot of working on that, we kicked off the phase 2 working group in March 2020. And almost immediately after, COVID was declared a pandemic, and the world went into lockdown, and the rest is history. It almost seems like yesterday. A year in lockdown might do that to you. But a few months later in June, GSA released an RFI that we had put together. And what we wanted to do is ask several questions, I think 7 total, designed to create a body of knowledge and data that the team could use to support our research efforts. We had no idea how many people would respond. We were wildly nervous that absolutely nobody would care, because we made it quite clear right up front that there was going to be no RFQs from this. There's no buying, no nothing. This is purely for academic research in order to help the greater community. But we were absolutely stunned when dozens, I mean, honestly, 61 vendors responded. And when we started parsing those results, there was over 1,000 pages of information. It was an incredible amount of information that the vendor community came together and spent an awful lot of time and resource providing. Some of them weighed in well over 100 pages. So that was an enormous effort on behalf of our vendor community, and we were really honored. And we said, we need to do something with this. So we started working on it right away and trying to figure out, kind of swallowing the drinking the ocean. And 2 months later, NIST released Special Pub 800-207, and kind of expected, but not really. And what we found after reviewing it was fantastic. It validated a lot of our phase 1 findings, and it helped inform phase 2 deliverables. And it really gave us a finer point on where we wanted to go with our phase 2 effort. And so it was a real boon to us. And so I think it was about 6-7 months later in December, we finally wrapped up the majority of our work, and we started focusing our efforts on creating the actual end deliverables, which we're going to give to you today. So I'd love to tell you about those. I get very excited just thinking about it, but unfortunately, it's not my show. So Teddy and the rest of the working group are going to roll out those deliverables today, and I'm not going to steal their thunder. But what I will say is that what we focused on here was a dogged, determined effort to ensure that whatever we gave you was going to be beneficial and usable to federal agencies right now, right out the box. So many times you read things and they construct theoretical constructs which demand perfection and say, well, here's what it looks like when everything's done. We didn't want to do that. We wanted to be able to give the federal CIOs and CISOs the information that they needed to start working right now. So we really think that by avoiding some of that fluff and compromising a little bit on maybe some of the imagery, but staying focused on the actual value, decision makers could be much more, they could be much better postured to use these deliverables today instead of just 2 or 3 months. Let's put it in a drive somewhere and we'll look at it later. So in summary, we're proud of 2 years worth of work so far that it's gone into both of these deliverables. It's been a lot of work, and we hope that it will save you a ton of time and effort in researching zero trust solutions. I provided this overview, and we're going to talk a little bit about the deliverables, and now we're going to get access to them, right? So I believe that the group, through these deliverables, through this working group, I believe that we've continued to raise the bar higher. I believe that we've set standards for other working groups, which I might even be part of, in order to carry on the knowledge and build an even stronger foundation from which our federal government partners can start implementing solutions. I'd like to thank GSA and ACT-IAC Cybersecurity for approving and supporting this effort. Without them, we would have never got off the ground, and we would have never got the responses that we did. I'd like to thank our team, cross-agency, cross-industry group, a fantastic group of professionals who took hours and hours and hours of their personal, valuable time in the middle of a pandemic where there was a lot of fear, a lot of anxiety, a lot of people didn't know what's going on, and these folks knuckled down and they focused on the mission. And thank you very much. You all have done a tremendous amount of effort. And last but certainly not least is the Zero Trust vendor community, without whom we would not have all of the information in which to be able to provide these deliverables. And you did so knowing that there was not going to be a purchase in the immediate future, but you did anyway. And all that work was fantastic. So thank you very much to the vendor community. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to Teddy.
Thanks, Dan. I want to reiterate a couple of things that Dan mentioned earlier. The focus of all the working groups for phase 2 was to provide information that federal agencies could use now, something that could be used the moment they picked this up, looked over it, and could influence their decision making in the current time. and not have to wait down the road for new architectures or new technology to be available to them. Our output for this work will be provided over the ACT-IAC website, and it has actually already been currently published, which links we'll provide after the meeting. I'd also like to reiterate the thanks to the GSA for their involvement with us in helping us get the RFI out. I also want to reiterate the special thank you to the vendor community, because that 61 vendors gave us over 1,000 pages of data to parse through. And as everyone knows, we all needed some kind of activities to entertain ourselves during the pandemic and our lockdowns. And it definitely gave us good amount of reading material to peruse. And then I also want to reiterate and give a very special thank you to all the volunteers, the dozens of volunteers in the ACT-IAC working group that came together, went through the material, put everything together for everybody. Hundreds of hours of volunteer work over this past year went into this. And I just want to personally acknowledge all of them and give them a special thank you for this. With that in mind, I am actually going to kind of change our discussion up a little bit, because I would like to invite Alper Kerman from the National Institute of Standards and Technology. He's the Security Engineer and Project Manager at the National Institute of Standards and Technology's NCCOE labs, to have a brief discussion on kind of their zero trust initiatives they're currently working on. And hand it over to him. Alper, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Can you guys hear me? Loud and clear?
I can hear you loud and clear, sir.
Awesome. So I have a few slides to share. Is that all right if I share my slides?
Yep.
Okay. Can you see my first slide? I hope you can.
Coming through nice and clear.
Awesome. Very good. Let's see here. So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Alper Kerman. First of all, thank you for the invite to, for inviting me to speak here. I'm the technical lead and the point of contact for zero trust efforts at NIST and NCCOE. And I also manage and represent various other projects there as well. So today, I'll take about 10 minutes to brief you on our upcoming ZTA project, which is the implementing a zero trust architecture. I'll go through several slices or slides about the project. But obviously, I want to provide a little bit of a background just to provide a little historical context for this presentation for our efforts. So I'll go to my next slide. So most of you probably remember we started our zero trust research back in early 2019. We kicked off our project that was driven by a federal initiative to basically to produce a guidance for adoption of ZTAs for securing federal information systems. So that was our first activity. And with that, we produced the mentioned document, NIST Special Publication 800-207, which is the Zero Trust Architecture document that I'm sure most of you are familiar with by now. How did we arrive to that document? Well, we went back as far as possible in history and basically tried to understand the idea of deperimeterization. And of course, Jericho Forum released a paper on this back in either 2004 or 2005. And then they released their Jericho Forum commandments based on this idea. So we looked at that. We looked at Forrester's work with John Kindervag coining the term zero trust, right? Based on this idea, again, same idea. I think that was back in 2010. We of course looked at Google's Beyond Core paper, looked at Gardner's Lean Trust. We obviously looked at the ACT-IAC report on zero trust cybersecurity trends, which provided a wealth of insight at the initial stages of our effort, came in a very timely manner for us. So we looked at all of those and put it all together into a framework, basically with context for the U.S. government, and released our document. So that was the background on that. So after the conclusion of our first Zero Trust effort, after releasing that document, we moved on to our second Zero Trust activity, which was to build a Zero Trust test lab at the NCCOE. So we acquired a lab, we built a network infrastructure that mimics one of the use case scenarios that we mentioned in 800-207. We integrated a few zero trust technologies that we can get our hands on and conducted capabilities testing using the test cases that we developed. So this was an overall educational and fact-finding exercise for us, but also helped us discover a few gaps along the way as well. So our next ZT activity is the upcoming NCCOE project, which is my rest of the presentation is about. So this project is essentially the follow-on demonstration project as our next efforts in the Zero Trust arena. On this project, we will implement different types of example Zero Trust architectures in collaboration with industry. We initiated this project back in November. We published a project description. We published the Federal Register Notice, which is essentially the official call out for industry participation on the project. We, of course, received an overwhelming response from the industry expressing, interest in participating on the project. In fact, we received over 65 LOI submissions. We scheduled and had meetings with each one to assess their proposed technology contributions and capabilities. And we're now in the technology analysis and vendor selection process. So far, we selected about 19 vendors, and they all received CRADAs to sign. So we're going through that process. We haven't, from a few of them, we received signed CRADAs. So that's going to be a lengthy process, I suspect. We will continue, our plan is to continue the selection process even after we kick off the project. So that will continue. So we're in that process now, and once we have the critical mass and technology coverage for all the capability requirements that we scoped out for the project, we will kick off the project. And as it stands, we think that time will be sometime in June. So we're looking forward to that. I'll go to my next slide. So this is just our notional timeline. As you can see, toward the middle of that timeline, there's the marking. We are here. Basically, everything that I had mentioned in my previous slide is what already took place to the left of that marking. And everything to the right of that is basically what we will be embarking on as we move forward. Next slide. So as you might imagine, through these meetings with vendors, we've been exposed to a wealth of technologies and capabilities. And to be able to make sense of it all, that is in terms of mapping the technology capabilities to the solution characteristics and security requirements that we scoped out on our project, we decided to create some capabilities buckets. And based on that, we created this high-level architecture. So obviously, it's not etched in stone, but it's merely a notional architecture for us for getting organized, which is helping us identify the areas that we need technology capabilities. So for example, excuse me, we have a capabilities bucket for endpoint security products for things like application protection, device control and compliance, vulnerability and threat mitigation, host IPS, malware protection, host firewall, etc. A bucket for security analytics products for things like network monitoring, endpoint monitoring, threat intelligence, user behavior. A bucket for ICAM products, of course, for things like identity management, access management, federation, identity governance. A bucket for data security products for things like data confidentiality, data integrity, and of course a bucket for ZT core components, products like for that can give us the policy engine, policy administrator, policy enforcement point for implementing approaches like enhanced identity governance-based ZTAs or software-defined perimeter-based ZTAs, micro-segmentation-based ZTAs. So that's sort of the plan for now in terms of the what we're following in terms of the capabilities. So this slide and the next two slides are basically about the deployment models that we would like to leverage in our builds. We will have multiple builds. So this one is the SDP, and I'm not going to walk through the slide, but basically it's an overlay network, and maybe a layer 7 or lower of the OSI stack, right? It's an approach that leverages concepts from software-defined networking, and also it fits the agent gateway model that we describe in 800-207. So that will be, we will have some builds based on that, or planning to have builds based on that. My next slide is on the micro-segmentation one. And this is, again, a ZTA based on placing individual or groups of resources on a unique network, right? It's protected by a gateway security component. Could be a next generation firewall or a special purpose gateway that act as PEPs or policy enforcement points. So this also, by the way, leverages the agent gateway model that we described in our, or fits into that model that we described in our -207. And the next one is the enhanced identity governance, which I refer to as the our plain vanilla deployment model. This is basically relies on, obviously, identity and assign attributes to the identity. That's the main driver. Of course, other factors such as device used, asset status, and some environmental factors may play a role in the evaluation of the access request. So this will be another one that we will leverage in terms of builds. My next slide is the deployment use case scenario. We're looking at the enterprise with satellite facilities, a case, enterprise use case. And, you know, it's all about users, different types of users' access to resources that might be sprinkled across hybrid environment, right? So we will be demonstrating, you know, employee access to corporate resources, access to internet resources, contractor access to corporate and internet resources. We will demonstrate server-to-server communication, cross-enterprise collaboration with business partners, and some demonstration on developing trust scoring with corporate resources. So that's really the plan in terms of the use case that we're looking at this point. And that looks like wraps up my presentation. So this is, I had a bunch of slides from my other speaking engagements, so I put it together very quickly. So I didn't know where they end, when it was going to end. But so this ends my, I'm sorry, but this ends my presentation. So I'd be happy to take any questions if we're taking questions.
Yeah, so I went ahead and I'm letting people, and everyone is muted at the moment, but you can unmute yourself if you have any questions for Alper. But that was fantastic. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you very much, too.
And then if anyone has any questions to follow this up, they can reach easily over the email and contact details here, correct?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Alper, not to put you on the spot, but are there any things that you think are coming innovations that might throw you for a loop or add any extra excitement to the process?
Any kind of innovations? That's a good question, but right now we're so focused on our project and the details of it that we're haven't, we haven't been surprised at this point. But one thing I can mention is that, there's obviously the CDM program, right? And obviously zero trust architectures use, CDM systems, right? It's part of the overarching architecture. It's a supporting component, to discover who's connected to your network, what's happening on your network, et cetera, et cetera. So we're just sort of having communication with them, with the agency, but that's just initial talks, I would say. But I'll leave it at that. There's not much other than that in terms of the communication. So I don't want to say anything that's, presumptuous. Any other questions?
Oh, hi, this is Ken Myers. A quick question. When you were talking about the identity governance approach and you called it plain vanilla, like in your mind, do you see the identity governance approach as maybe a more basic or easier approach than micro-segmentation or software-defined networks?
It's just, it's, I wouldn't say easier, but maybe it applies to different scenarios. People, environments that have most of their application services in the cloud, and they rely on basically who the user is, less than what device they're on. So there might be a mix of devices, right? Bring your own device, or even maybe corporate issued devices as well. But so it's a different application, I would say. It's a deployment model for a different use case, but still, you have organizations obviously, have some organizations have some of their assets in on-prem, and some are on the cloud, and somewhere only on the in the cloud. So all these deployment models that we describe in 800-207, they all have their applications, I would say, and I would leave it at that. I wouldn't say that it's easier or less complicated. It's just that I called it a vanilla version because it doesn't include, when you look at it, it doesn't include, micro-segmentation, like the next generation firewalls and then the SDP type of approach in the mix. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you.
Sure.
So Alper, we actually have a question from the chat here. So
Okay,
what is your perspective on progressive segmentation towards micro-segmentation based zero trust architectures, especially dedicating a zone for management and administrative segments, backups, PKI, etc.?
Again, it just it's all existing approaches, right? We have to leverage them all. We're not zero trust architecture doesn't bring anything unique other than the logical components that it brings it to the table. So I would say we don't, from our perspective, we don't take anything out of the equation. We use even, some people look at the perimeters. So does this mean perimeters go away? No, they certainly don't go away. So everything, I wouldn't say we're moving away from something and then going forward anything. We're just leveraging what works in our environments by orchestrating everything in a dynamic way and scrutinizing it consistently for every access, and assuming that the network cannot be trusted, and implement strategies that fits your own network, your network environment, and where your services are.
This is John Lee. I was curious about its support for the IPv6 only initiatives that the federal government is transitioning to.
Yeah, so we're paying attention to that, and actually in our lab, part of our infrastructure is dual stack on that regard, and we are in the process of adding more to that infrastructure, and each independent infrastructure that mimics an enterprise per se, will have an IP version 6 support as well.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions?
This has been fantastic, Alper. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
We will provide the contact details for the presenter afterwards as well, in case people have questions for you. But this has been wonderful.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me to speak. It was a pleasure, presenting and sharing our experience with you.
Thank you, sir. All right. On that, I'm actually going to hand us back over to Dan Jacobs so that we can begin our conversation with our state speakers that we've invited today. One thing I'm going to say beforehand, just because of how in depth these discussions can get, I'm going to be keeping most everyone muted and locked during this point. So if you have any questions you'd like to ask, please use the WebEx chat. We will take them and give them to the panelists at the end of the panel if there's time. But other than that, I'm going to hand this back over to you, Dan.
Great, thanks, Teddy. Sorry, I got a little feedback there. So everyone, today's a great day. We have 3 representatives from our state CISO's office. We have Mr. Jim Weaver, who joined the North Carolina Department of Information Technology in March 2021. He's got more than 30 years of leadership and management experience in the IT industry. He leads the agency responsible for strategic IT planning and the procurement and delivery of IT services and solutions, as well as cybersecurity and efforts to expand broadband access and affordability across North Carolina. We have Maria Thompson, North Carolina's first Chief Risk Officer. She joined the North Carolina Department of Information Technology in January 2015. In her role, Maria is responsible for developing an integrated statewide framework to manage information risk, including operations, security, and data protection. She served 20 years in the Marine Corps, hoorah, Marine myself, where she retired as a cybersecurity chief. Her previous role included serving in the Iraq Theater of Operations, a certification authority. She served as senior security engineer for Secure Info and a senior security architect and program manager for Imperatus Corp in Virginia. And we have Mr. Michael Watson. Mr. Michael Watson has been the Chief Information Security Officer for the state of Virginia at the Virginia Information Technologies Agency since 2011. He leads the Commonwealth Security and Risk Management Team, which provides security governance, oversight, and risk management for the executive, judicial, and legislative branches of the government in Virginia, which has more than 100,000 employees, 60,000 workstations, 3,500 servers, and a partridge in a pear tree. Mr. Watson has served under the current governor, Ralph Northam, and former governor, Terry McAuliffe. He's been in the IT agency since 2010 and has been in state government since 2006. Before that, he worked in higher education and the private sector. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. We appreciate your time today. Do we have any comments from the attendees before we kick off a couple of questions?
Dan, are you basically asking us to make some opening comments?
Sure, anything you like. It's an open forum. I think the audience would appreciate a little bit of organic growth instead of rigid, structured stuff. Let's talk zero trust.
Okay, well, I feel a little outnumbered here, being the only CIO, I think, on the call here. So I did stay at a Holiday Inn. Does that qualify me if I watched a Jack Clancy or a Tom Clancy novel or something along those lines? And of course, I had a Marine Corps theme. So, hey, good afternoon, everybody. Jim Weaver from the state of North Carolina. So I'm very pleased to be here on behalf of NASCIO and representing the National Association of State CIOs. And from my perspective, where I sit as a state CIO, it's never a good thing when whether it's your chief risk officer, and I still call Maria my CISO, and she still looks at me like that. But when she calls on a Friday, you know, and I was asked a question yesterday, when your CISO calls you on a Friday and says blank, you respond blank. And so my comment is when Maria calls and says, "Can we talk?" and my response is, "Now what happened?" What I've learned is that as we look at zero trust, and again, I think zero trust is a nice way of saying least amount of privilege, which is, again, as you all know in the IT industry, we like to reinvent terms to make it sound cooler and more techy than what it is. But I think we've all been on this journey for a long, long time and trying to get to the point where we figure out what is the best approach for us to get there. And, you know, talk probably from my aspect, less about the technology, more about what we need to do from a people and a process aspect. And I'm very fortunate to have such a capable person like Marie here as part of our team, and to get into the details of zero trust, because as you can imagine, she'll do circles around me and you know, as I'm just the CIO, right? At the end of the day. But my job is really to enable her opportunities to move forward and introduce a zero trust program. And I like to use the word program as opposed to project, because this is not a one and done type thing. There is a number of activities that need to occur. And one of the things that we have struggled here in North Carolina, and Maria knows this all too well, is that we have not taken a look at cybersecurity and what we need to do over a multi-year approach of being able to build, deploy, and sustain operations over a life cycle. And so while Maria has been phenomenal of going through couch cushions and getting loose change out and figuring out ways to pay for things, that's not the way we need to do. And candidly, only about 2% of our IT budget right now is actually spent on cybersecurity here in North Carolina, which is woefully inadequate and something we're working on to address with the General Assembly here as we move forward. And so with that end, I would like to turn over to Maria and let her offer a few comments about some of the great things that she has going on.
Thank you everyone for the opportunity, and thanks, Jim, for those kind words. I will say that you've hit the nail on the head. You know, we've had that systemic problem of recurring budget, which, as you can think of when it comes to zero trust, does impact the way that we're able to implement solutions across the programs that are needed. But that being said, we have started on this journey. And as we looked across our platform, and, you know, in the last couple of years, we've been adopting a hybrid cloud environment. We looked at where was the low-hanging fruit, where could we implement zero trust as a starting point moving forward. And so we've started to build that environment out into our cloud environment, ensuring that we, to what Jim stated, are applying as least privilege as much as possible. But then from an internal perspective, we're looking at all the solutions that we currently have within our portfolio. Because I think one of the misnomers with zero trust is, and I think there may have been a speaker that mentioned it earlier, that you're thinking that you're transitioning to something new. Really, it's looking at the solutions holistically within your environment, the organic solutions that you have, and implementing those restrictive mechanisms or security controls that need to be in place, or that should have been in place from the get-go. With this new, I guess, the new world that we're in, the new norm, I really hate that. I really hate that, that I'm even saying that. But the new norm and the new reality that we're living in right now with this hybrid workforce has really allowed us to take a look at and refocus our efforts, and not just the traditional defense in depth that we've had in the past, taking a look at how we are going to structure ourselves to follow the endpoint, to follow the user, to follow the identities. So as we look to implement zero trust within North Carolina, we're going to, and we've already started, taking a look at the solutions that we already have in place, and then starting to tighten the ropes, you know, if you will, around those, and look at where are the areas that it makes sense. Looking at it from an operational risk perspective, what's our data, you know, and really applying those controls where it's necessary. Because I think, again, that another thing that a lot of folks think about when they think about zero trust is we have to implement it everywhere, and it has to be the same for everyone. And that's not necessarily true. I think the first thing is definitely focusing on where those true organizational risks reside, And then where does it make sense to implement those controls? So some of those are the steps, if you will, that we're looking to, and we're on that path of developing within North Carolina from a programmatic perspective.
Sounds great. Mr. Watson, how about Virginia? Are
Yeah,
you with it?
and we've been fortunate to have some great neighbors of the South. So I know, Maria and I and Jim and Nelson have talked lots about different approaches and different ways of trying to tackle some of the challenges that come with looking at a zero trust environment in trying to implement something this large. I think one of the things that I'm the most in Virginia, we're a centralized agency, right? We do a lot of IT for our executive branch agencies, and that includes security for most of them. We run we run the SOC, we run the antivirus and the intrusion detection systems and all the rest of the security cadre of equipment that's there. And what we're finding very, I'll say fascinating or interesting about this particular approach is we've spent a long time abstracting security from the agencies directly so that they knew that whatever services they got, it was just built in. It was there. It was, security was part of the service. We're now moving to a component where we're asking those people who are consuming the services to participate a little bit more directly, the business end, right? It's the people that are standing up the applications or using the applications are going to have to differentiate. I need this user to be able to do these 4 things, and that has to automatically work in our environment. They don't need to know about, the firewall rules and everything else that need to be in place, but they're expecting that when they assign those roles that, in the magic that happens in the background that we all spend so much time trying to make sure are integrated and orchestrated together, is going to happen when they do that classification and, assessment of the user that they're looking to put in place. And, that's exciting to me that there's going to be a more active ownership of the security component at the business level. A lot of times, and a lot of us here know this, we are trying to help the business go in the right direction and make sure their systems and applications are secure. But it's usually a little bit of a jerky start or a stop start kind of scenario where we'll go down a path and then we'll find, hey, there's this part of the design that isn't working, or there's this issue with the setup, and then we have to kind of go back and start again. This type of approach helps drive the business component to a particular point in the process and automates a lot of the stuff that we're worried about in the background. Now, of course, it's on us as security practitioners to make sure all the parts and pieces are in place, and our counterparts at the CIOs to make sure that we've got all the technology and structure tied together. But I'm very optimistic that we're going down a path that incorporates more ownership than we even had before.
Right, and on that, let me form a question to the panel, right? What we found in part of our phase 2 efforts when we start, and I don't want to take too much away from our use cases, but there are driving factors for considering and adopting and piloting ZTNA or Zero Trust Network Access solutions. And higher performing organizations tended to link these driving factors to their business requirements. They had certain security requirements, and Zero Trust is flexible enough to be able to start addressing those specifically. Has any of that gone into your decisions at the state level? Or has it just been one of those kind of the great Eye of Sauron looks over here and all the security minions, man, Zero Trust? How did that work out for you?
So for Virginia, we are absolutely looking at, I'll say the best way to implement this in phases and trying to start with an area where our highest risk components are. I mean, and I think somebody already mentioned it earlier, this is more of a journey, not necessarily a project, right? It's a program, it's not a project. We're something we're going to have to continue care and feeding of over time, and we'll have to grow and change and shift as the environment grows. When we have those innovative technologies that are introduced, it's going to require integration within this component, or stuff's just not going to work anymore, right? Imagine new tablets being released, or something, new endpoint technology in general that ends up being released is going to have to be able to integrate with this. And we do our best to make sure it's technology agnostic, but if there's something added, whether it's a new browser or whatever, it's going to require us to shift our approach. And I think from our perspective, we're looking at ways to start with those systems and functions that meet two criteria. One is that it is an actual risk scenario. We're mitigating some level of risk attached to it. And the second is that the organization has to be able to do the classification work to know which users and which systems are supposed to talk to the other users and other systems. There are definitely some organizations, anybody with a large organization knows this, some segments of business that can't tell us that offhand. And instead of trying to start with them, we'll start with the folks that have a better handle on it.
Maria?
Yeah, I think Mike hit the nail on the head on a lot of the topics because obviously as a state, a fellow state here, we have the same situations that we're dealing with. What I would add is, we have federal requirements, and we will, generally speaking, those federal requirements drive some of the changes in the discussions that we have, within our organization on how we implement security controls. So we would more likely be focusing on those specific federal requirements, whether it's IRS 1075, HIPAA, high trust, whatever those requirements, PCI requirements that are out there, that will set the stage as those core focus areas to implement Zero Trust. And similar to what Mike stated, we have those legacy applications that have been in place for decades. The person who developed them are long gone. So those are not going to be the ones that we're going to be focusing on, assuming that those weren't the ones that were part of the federal, and hopefully they're not, part of the original federal solution that was identified to handle that type of data. But we're going to be looking at it from a risk perspective. Again, same thought process, look at the highest risk first. Look at those areas where it makes sense to implement it. Look at the technologies that we have available and what we can, because just like I'm sure all of you are dealing with the same thing. You have a lot of tools within your toolbox, and Jim always tells me, Maria, no more tools.
I don't know. My question is when does security have enough tools?
Fair enough. That is exactly his right. Yes.
Never.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm told.
Yes. He has to pry them out of my cold clammy hands. But look at the tools that we have and the capabilities, and optimize those, because we have tools that we've had in place for quite a long time. And I know that truthfully, if we've taken a look at, step back and taken a look at the solutions that we do have, are we implementing them to the best of their ability, and are we leveraging the capabilities across the board? So again, those two things, high risk, look at the tools, see how we can make them match.
Yeah, and I would just like to add one thing, if I could, into the conversation. Here in North Carolina, very fortunate that Governor Cooper values and recognizes the importance of cybersecurity, and so does our General Assembly, believe it or not, even though I talked about the budget woes. But if you notice, when Maria introduced herself, she didn't call herself the Chief Information Security Officer. She basically introduced herself as the Chief Risk Management Officer. And really, that's, I think, what we need to do more and more as we have these discussions across the cabinet into other parts of the agencies, is really start talking about the risk mitigation component, not so much about cyber, because cyber folks start fogging over. They don't understand it. It seems like this is big nefarious thing that's out there, but they understand business risk. And I was just, when I was listening to Mike talk there, and as well as Maria talking about, that's really what we're talking about at the end of the day, is how do we mitigate risk and do it effectively to get to the outcomes we're trying to look for.
I totally agree, Jim. Let me continue to pull that thread a little bit. So from a state perspective, and this might be surprising, but absolutely no federal agency has any legacy IT to worry about. We're actually quite topped up, especially with our HVAs.
That's why you're not throwing all that federal money towards us at the state level, right?
Miss Graves is on the phone. I'm not gonna go down that road. But Let's talk a little bit about what life is like at the state level, right? So what we have is a lot of interdependent and sometimes linked, what several panel members have talked about earlier, systems that all need a little bit of help. We have the hospitals, we have the school systems, we have other interdependent systems, we have the critical infrastructure, et cetera. Not all of these are continuously integrated into one single funnel that we can control. I could be wrong, please correct me. But the question to the panel is, from that perspective, where you have multiple smaller organizations which all rely on similar technology, and we're trying to affect security in a way that manages risk and is able to start providing metrics so we can understand the critical questions like, is what we're doing working? Is there a return on security investment? How do you at the state level address some of these really thorny issues? Because I think that the extended audience is in a very similar position, and your answers could really inform some of their way forward.
Well, I guess I'll start off first. So just yesterday, in a hearing with the General Assembly, my plea and ask of them was fund us to do enterprise cybersecurity activities. Don't fund individual agencies. You are not getting the value or the return on investment for every dollar you're putting into cybersecurity. You're getting pennies back on the dollar. We need fund us at the appropriate level so we can go do it across the enterprise and take that decision-making aspect away from agencies who rightfully are focused on their business. Our business is IT. Their business is providing critical services to residents of the state. Let them go do what they need to go do. Let us go do what we need to do and do it in a manner that enables them to continue to move forward with their opportunities. I'm sure as you all have seen over 2020, whether state you all reside in, we saw challenges across the educational theme, right? I'm sure the stories out there about Zoom bombing and everything else that was going on. We know there's nefarious actors out there just looking to take advantage of children in some of these challenging situations. And as I said yesterday in this hearing, our children don't have the maturity or the awareness as to what's going on because they grew up in the digital age. They know these devices and what they need to do, and that's their world. And they're totally oblivious to some of the other things that are going on out there across and the vulnerabilities that creates. So we've seen this, and there is no magic button here at the end of the day. If there was, we'd all be smacking the heck out of it and hitting that easy button and probably needing new batteries. But this problem didn't happen overnight. We're not going to fix it overnight, but we can start addressing and start working to getting to different outcomes. And you're absolutely correct. It's about metrics. How are we demonstrating that we're bringing value back, and what is the return on investment? Because at the end of the day, our legislative body here in North Carolina represents the shareholders of North Carolina. Why would they invest money into these things without showing what the benefits are coming out of it on the back end? And that's what we have to do a better job of articulating, that cost benefit analysis. What's their ROI? And be able to start having the painful conversations of really talking about, here's all the bad things that are really happening on a day-to-day basis. We've seen already in some previous states that I've been at where legacy applications, a bad application, doesn't matter if it's on-prem or it's on the cloud, it's a bad application and it's going to get exploited. And we've seen the consequences firsthand of those exploitations at a state level, and they're not cheap. And while we all have cyber insurance, and thank God we do, you know what happens after you put a claim in, your policy premiums start going up dramatically. And that is not a course of action. Hope is not a course of action. We need to be more proactive. And again, as you all know in this community, it's not if, it's when, and how prepared are you when the when happens. Maria? Anything you want to?
Yes, Jim. So my angle is going to be on looking at it from, again, the whole state approach to cybersecurity. And this is something that Jim he did an awesome job yesterday in his hearing when he talked about the money going back to the budget and how you budget for security, how we're spending it. when he talked about the Joint Cyber Task Force that we have a core group of individuals made up of our National Guard cyber team, how funding them versus having each individual organization that's getting hit by ransomware and the monies that they're losing from these ransomware incidents, how that can be beneficial if we put the money in the right place. So I think from a statewide perspective, we have to pull together and work more, have those partnerships, because I think that, whether you're looking at it from a federal standpoint or state standpoint, we're interconnected. We've seen situations where critical infrastructure are getting impacted within on the local government infrastructure, but it's impacting the citizens of North Carolina that obviously funnels up. So we really have to look at it from a big picture. I think that as we move forward with Zero Trust, and going back, there was one particular incident that I thought was as I think about Zero Trust, I think it's very crucial to mention. Last year, we had a city and a county that both got impacted by a ransomware, two different variants actually. And of course, both of them were pointing their fingers at each other. They were sharing data with each other, and there was no firewall in between. So when we talk about Zero Trust, there's full trust between these two organizations. This is where Zero Trust would have been beneficial. And since then, something has been implemented in order to kind of broker that communication between the two and add some level of security. But you're going to see a lot more of those types of interconnections, and that we don't have any kind of guard or any kind of control in place. So having those solutions in place, having people that are available to respond to those things, which is where the National Guard Cyber Response Force comes in, can be that another pair of eyes looking and giving the fidelity and being able to aggregate and provide those metrics on the benefits to the program in the long run.
Great, Mike.
Yeah, and along some of those same lines, right? I think we've all, as security practitioners, and even to a certain extent, I'll say the early days of IT, have run into the problem of how do I prove that I'm providing value? When we first started with computers, I've got a couple folks in my group that had been working long enough that they go, I used to be able to do this without this device in front of me. I could pull out my ledger and figure out how to do the addition without too much of a problem. And really what it comes down to is folks are slowly coming to understand that the challenge with technology is the usefulness of the technology. It's the fact that we are all connected together, and when you impact one part, you impact all parts. And this is one of the reasons I think that the Zero Trust initiatives that we're starting to see are so, much of a game changer, in that we are finally able to make the parts small enough that when you impact one, you're not impacting all. The technology and such that we've got in place, we worry about the end user that is browsing the web, getting infected and subsequently turning around and shutting down some critical infrastructure, whether it is a water pump or emergency services or whatever, take your pick for whatever it is. That's what we're really worried about happening. And especially in government, right? We tend to have the high stakes items. We in government run the stuff that is either not appropriate for private sector to run, or private sector doesn't have the right drivers to necessarily run it, right? It's always that question, again, mostly on the ROI. Law enforcement is a really great example of something where it is something that government tends to run because we want to make sure that we're not at odds with trying to figure out how to run the bottom line. We're doing it for public interest. And that makes this conversation very difficult when we're trying to figure out how to implement technology effectively and efficiently in the environment, and subsequently tie that security component to it. We're always looking to balance our investments and make sure that we are doing our best to use citizen dollars wisely. And it's always a difficult, just as much as we're every dollar, I've heard this from a lot of our agencies, right? Every dollar we spend on cybersecurity or even technology is a dollar away from, feeding children or providing, services to those in need. And we get it, we understand it. And our job is to make sure as security practitioners and technologists is to make sure that we're investing wisely wherever it is, possible. And I think that, and I hate that this is kind of the way that it's come about, but as we've seen these large events happen in the media, whether it is, school districts being impacted, as Jim mentioned with the Zoom bombing, or, other ransomware scenarios where folks, government organizations or even private organizations go either completely belly up or completely lose access to all the information they've got. Those are the examples that we have to hold up to say, this is the alternative for not doing the right thing, for not implementing the controls the way that we need to, for not mitigating the risks that we know exists. We do our best to make sure folks understand what the potential consequences are. But just like anywhere else, right? Some folks decide that they want to take on that risk, and that shift and that balance is constantly changing as to where our risk thresholds and stuff are. So when we're looking at that at a government approach, I think that's one of the largest things that we run into is that shifting risk picture, and knowing that without that investment, we're going to end up with services impacted, even though we may not fully understand that return on investment.
Yeah, I completely agree. And at risk of saying something that I might regret later, when asked the question, what is one of the most, if not the most pressing issue in the cybersecurity community today, my answer is our inability to communicate return on security investment. If our only arrow is doom, we're not getting our message across properly. We're not adequately giving the business reason to see us as a value proposition, and we become a cost center that is simply like, well, you're taking money out of or food out of children's mouths. We need to be attuned to better ways to communicating our value to business. Totally agree. I think we have time for one question, and I really wanted to ask you this, which is, ACT-IAC is a volunteer organization, public-private partnership. We would love to be able to help. How best to do that? I think if you can pack that in to make it a quick answer, we also have a great question in the comments. And if you took the opportunity to write the comment, I think it's M. Howell, thank you very much, is what challenges have you encountered in orchestrating risk assessment and prioritization, and how have you addressed them? So feel free to answer one or the other, or both if we have the time. Very interested in hearing your response, because we really want to help. Helping you is helping us.
I'm happy to jump in there first. I think, and I'll try to do both quickly. The biggest help, honestly, from when we're looking at this all together, is understanding that we've got to make this process, especially with the Zero Trust process, as simple as possible. Because we're trying to shift a lot of the understanding to our business owners, it's going to be imperative that they're able to implement and leverage the Zero Trust interface, the components that we need to do as security practitioners, our job, as easily as possible. And the other component about the challenges and stuff that we've orchestrated risk is actually along those same lines. Getting the business to understand how important or where or how it is that they're going to have to participate in the assessment and prioritization process, and understanding the risk and the business impact is always the challenge. That's kind of why our positions exist. That's why Jim and Maria are talking risk, because that's what the business understands. And as much as I'd love to say that we have full understanding of that across the board, it will always be a continued process of making sure folks understand what risks technology bring to the picture. And our job, and what I'm hoping to see more from the Zero Trust initiatives, is the ability to have the business more connected to what that risk posture looks like.
Yeah, just to add, I would say that my goal within North Carolina is to empower the business to not necessarily accept the risk, because that's not theirs to accept. Empower them to do what they need to do, but still ensure that we maintain that visibility and governance, if you will, at the enterprise level. So, you know, where ITAC, I think, can be of benefit to us is, to Mike's point, laying out a foundation that speaks to that allows us to educate our users, our business on those processes, and what tweaks we need to do, and what cultural shifts that need to occur over time. And always, it's always about partnership, right? We can't do it at the state level without private-public partnership. It has to be that way. So again, continuing the dialogue, fostering that the organizations that allow us to have these types of communications back and forth, I think will be beneficial for us.
You know, I'll just add on to it. These type of P3 opportunities, the ability to share information, learn from each other, best practices, that's the only way we're going to get better, because we're all part of the ecosystem here at the end of the day. Regardless of where we live, we're all taxpayers. So whether it's federal taxes, state taxes, local taxes, you name it, we want to make sure that as taxpayers, we're getting the utmost value in this as well. Maria's right. We are here to try to empower the business. But at the same time, too, the business needs to understand what they can accept and what they can't accept. And as Maria knows, here early in my tenure, we had one agency who went ahead and did something and basically commented. We reviewed the risks and we're willing to accept them. And I'm like, well, tell me what the risks were you identified, tell me what your mitigating controls were, and let us assess to make sure that the risk you're accepting doesn't have impact on the bigger enterprise. And then there's crickets. Right. So I haven't lived in Missouri, but Missouri's the show me state. If you can't show me you did it, then I question whether or not you did it. And so we're starting to wade into those territorial waters of, you know, we do, and I'm a firm believer IT's here to empower the business. I preach that, I sleep it, I drink it. But at the same time, you don't let the business go off and jump off the cliff for the sake of jumping off the cliff. And we got to make sure that we have those right checks and balances in place. So the more that we can come together as a community, the more we can learn from each other. How do we start articulating metrics differently? How do we start showing the cost benefit that cybersecurity is providing on a day-to-day basis? Because let's admit it, we don't talk about when the bad things happen, right? You know, it's kind of like we kind of put it under the carpet. We really don't want to talk about it because it's embarrassing. We should be out there talking about that kind of stuff and learning from each other as to what happened, how did it occur, what did you see, you know, what was the events leading up, and, you know, what can we start doing proactively to make sure that we're not susceptible to those same types of instances. I think since I've been here in North Carolina, Maria, four attempted cyber incidents or successful cyber incidents against local government / critical infrastructure. So this stuff isn't going away. And as Maria indicated, here in North Carolina, we are taking a holistic state approach, which is why leveraging those National Guard resources that we have at our disposal is so critical for what we do on a day-to-day basis. And then the interesting part is I get in the green suit with them on weekends. So, you know, you know, the latest one that Maria went through, she's calling me on the state side. I'm sitting in a briefing, getting it from the National Guard side, hearing the same thing, which was, again, reassuring to hear that what Maria was telling me was the same thing being communicated over here as well. So we have a great team. We're very well rehearsed on doing incident response, but, you know, we don't want to always be doing incident response. It'd be nice to be able to do some things more proactively and get to different outcomes.
All right. Jim, Maria, North Carolina sounds like it's in great hands. Mike, thank you very much. We appreciate Virginia's representation today. That concludes our panel Q&A. It was a fantastic group of questions, fantastic group of questioners. We really appreciate your time. And now we're going to get back to Teddy, who's hopefully going to show us some of those deliverables.
Thanks, Dan. I want to reiterate the thank you for you guys participating today. This was amazing information and fantastic. And there's been a lot of thank yous coming in through the chat as well. So thank you very much. On that note, I'm going to go ahead and we broke our work in phase 2 into 3 different working groups that we're going to go into the details of. I'm going to let the leads of each working group actually kind of go into detail about what they focused on. But just to give everyone kind of an idea of what we did with each group is We had one working group focused on zero trust capabilities and how they mapped over frameworks such as CDMs, CSF, NIST 853, and modernizing and mapping those out. We had a working group that focused specifically on agencies' current use cases as to what their principles were and what they were driving for zero trust design approaches in their current work. And we had a working group also focused on the valuable and enormous amount of information we got from the RFI so that we could provide that out to the community in a compiled format. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand this over to our capabilities working group.
Hello, everyone. Steve, are you on? Make sure
Absolutely
my
on.
partner in crime here is ready. Okay, let me share. Oh, hang on. It's not letting me share. Hey, Teddy, our backup plan of you being able to share my slides, I need to invoke it. WebEx is not being kind to me.
And I've got the tertiary backup plan if necessary.
Okay, thank you. Actually, Steve, do you want to go if you have them up? I love Cisco and now WebEx hates me. That's the real joke here.
There you go.
All right, so we're part of the Zero Trust Phase 2 project capability working group. This has been a fantastic group to work with, and we'll get into the details of that. One of the things that we know is common knowledge behind the main principle of zero trust is never trust, always verify. There's a lot of simple definitions of zero trust out there that everyone should understand by now, but what do they really mean? What does that mean from a component perspective? How do all of the different architecture pieces of a zero trust combine to really make that holistic strategy relevant to the agencies that are trying to implement this today? The capabilities group got spun out of just that thinking. So lots of elements, lots of components. What's the big picture and how do they fit together? And when you start to layer on some of the existing standards in it, just like Maria said, this isn't new stuff, right? Zero trust isn't something to be migrated to. It's not a brand new architecture that we all have to shift towards. These things are components that are in the large part already existing in our environment, but that need to be tightened, tweaked, optimized so that we can have better control over the different security elements that we're trying to regulate here. There are lots of standards, CSF, lots of NIST standards that Alfred went over today and that are continuing to refine how we think about zero trust and security as a whole. How do they really fit together? And then how do they drive the needs and outcomes that we're looking for? How do we combine all of this stuff? So no shortage of challenge here, but this was what our group set out to accomplish and to get our hands around when we first started this.
Yeah, and Lauren, I think it's a really interesting point. If you think about what we saw as the challenge, we just heard about that from the panel. So whether it's Maria talking about HIPAA, PCI, high trust, the IRS requirements, weren't even getting into the federal requirements that we were talking about, all of that becomes critical. We heard in spades from Mike on how to limit the adverse impacts so that you can actually continue to function. The business and the mission of the state continues to operate in that area. Same things we saw on the federal level from that point. And then earlier from Alper, we heard about leveraging what was already there in existing environments. What did you already own that could be better leveraged? And we saw that again in spades across what we saw about all those elements coming together. So obviously, if that's common, that we all share that, there must have been a timeline that we put together to try to find those answers. Isn't that true?
Absolutely. I mean, zero trust is the glue that pulls all of this together. So whether it's IT modernization, cloud smart strategies, everything, it pulls all of it together and it makes it reality for the agencies and for the citizens ultimately. I think you kind of covered this, Steve. Zero trust also consolidates a lot of the disparate security conversations that were happening prior to the zero trust conversation taking place. There were a lot of siloed conversations around identity management and asset management and how to secure those things individually and not enough conversations about the big picture of how to put it all together. All right, so I'm going to get into a little bit of our journey here, because it has been a journey. This has been about a year and a half in the making. And when we first started meeting, there were several wonderful security professionals that came together to look at the capabilities. We had CISOs from government agencies, we had CISOs from industry, we have security practitioners at all levels. Really had a bunch of were committed to making zero trust a reality in their environments. And so what you're going to see is a combination of all of those put together. But when we first got into this meeting, to say the knowledge levels around the different standards and the different practices were disparate. There were, huge gaps between what I knew and what Steve and Teddy knew to just start. But then also between the rest of the group, we had newcomers that had just, started in government, that had just started, learning about zero trust, and we had folks that had been in the industry for years and years and years and had lots of wisdom to share. So it was very much a meeting of the minds, that first meeting, and pulling it all together. To just get everybody started, we started at the basics. We started with reviewing. Each week we reviewed a different standard and pulled out the capabilities that were mentioned in that standard, so that we could start to cross-examine them. So you can kind of see here, we went through the 800-207 capabilities, then we went through the CDM capabilities and the CSF capabilities, and what we got were these really long lists, columns, if you will, of data of all of these different capabilities that were addressed in these standards. So we started to matrix them together. And what we discovered was, while there is a lot of overlap, there are some really key pieces where these standards diverge in thinking, or they are trying to get towards the same goal, but they diverge in practice and how they implement that procedure. So we found out some really, really interesting insights in that matrix. And looking at sheets, maybe a little bit longer. It may have been more like 8 or 10 with the pandemic. We never can really tell about time these days. But after about 10 minutes, that just spreadsheets alone aren't going to get us there. There are tons of spreadsheets. It was as simple as going down and checking the boxes in all the spreadsheets. Everyone would already be done with zero trust. We'd be coming and moving on to the next task. But right now, there are a lot of spreadsheets out there that tell you the security controls. We knew that we had to get this information into a format that wasn't just spreadsheets, that push the deliverable on. And this gets into some of the use case group is doing, where they're coming up with stories around how people are using zero trust and what it really looks like. And then it comes down to being able to present the information in a way that's consumable by people. I loved what you said around one of you in the panel discussion said that you've got to keep it simple. We've got to make sure that zero trust remains simple and that we don't add to the complexity by its nature. And I think that in combining the standards and thinking about them in combination together, there was a real risk of making it overly complicated, and we recognized that keeping it simple was part of the practice. So that's why we implemented a Domo solution that you'll see, and added that schematic to the ACT-IAC website, which Teddy is going to go through. And let's keep moving.
Yeah,
Steve,
Lauren,
do you have any comments about the process?
No, I think you summarized the process beautifully. I think the passion that came out, the commitment of the folks that were there, both industry and government, the leadership that government showed, it was really an exciting time to be part of that. And she lied when she said that we did things week by week. It extended to month in terms of really diving into it, because it really engendered a lot of conversation and discussion around what's the right thing to produce the mission and business outcomes that our federal and states need to be delivering services to their constituents. And this slide really kind of summarizes what I think are some of the top findings. And the table stakes, and we've heard it already, is you've got to be able to share information. You've got to do it intelligently, to Maria's point, but you've got to be able to share the data. It's open extensibility. If you're dealing with a vendor, if you're dealing with a solution set that cannot extend its information into someone else's environment that's not dealing with an open standard, then you should probably walk away from them, because this is the way the direction that industry is going. So open extensibility, absolutely essential for the key parts of the core components of the cybersecurity framework elements for Zero Trust: policy engine, policy administrator, policy enforcement points. We've heard already about needing to leverage existing agency investments. This is not a new start, as Maria mentioned. This is leveraging what's already been there. You've made smart investments. How can you make those investments now meld into an architecture that is Zero Trust oriented? Because it is a journey, it's a concept. One of the things that came out, though, that's absolutely critical is the ability to continuously monitor the activity. This is an area that is beginning more and more capability in terms of technology assist in that area, the same way with the ability to detect and then take action on anomalous activity. Going back to the point in Carolina, when you had the county and the state or the city talking, and if all of a sudden you detected that anomalous activity, you could immediately block it so that you didn't have that east-west movement of adversarial activity inside of that environment. Some of the areas, though, that on the near-term emphasis, and you've heard a little bit of this talk, harmonizing what is coming in the area of TIC 3.0, because that's a very flexible program out of Department of Homeland Security. The integration of CDM, you've heard Albert mention, continuous diagnostics and mitigation, and how that evolves at Department of Homeland Security. And then just the explosion of IoT devices and sensors that really need to be part of this if we're going to really effectively deliver citizen services. And that is key. And so how do we bring those areas in? And again, technology is arriving, and I think that is going to be an area of very fruitful movement.
I
But
want
as
to
we
add
know,
one
Lauren,
more
there
to
are areas...
that
Sure,
recommended
go ahead.
emphasis, because I think we kind of covered it with the open extensibility, but it's worth re-emphasizing that there's more to come around this. How we manage our data is so important into these systems. Garbage in, garbage out is definitely what will happen if we aren't sure about how the downstream data sources are affecting every single one of our Zero Trust security policies, from identity to device management to inventories. All of these things, internally have to be correct in order for us to get the external value from it.
Agree completely. And that leads really to some of the keys. And we've heard it already in the discussions. Enterprise thinking. It can't be a silo by silo approach. Consistent enterprise, and I would submit cross-domain architectural approaches. We're past the point where a security silo can handle this. The network needs to be involved. The data center, the cloud, the edge, 5G. This needs to be an enterprise approach to solve it, and you don't need and can't afford separate solutions for each of those silos. It has to be enterprise in nature. And as Lauren was saying, the open source world and how that integrates is going to be absolutely critical, because it's about the data and protecting the data and making sure the data is available to be used by the people delivering the services. And I would
since we're
submit
talking about the
Go
work
ahead.
that we're doing, I think that was still a gap. I started working for that focuses much more on open source technology halfway through this project, and realized that my day job wasn't talking with the Zero Trust group. I think we've got to combine those worlds a little bit more, because there is a whole world around Zero Trust and security strategies that's evolving in the open source community that needs to be brought into the conversation as well.
Well said. And I'd go back to what Dan said in the very beginning, that if you really think about what the purpose of this group was, it was to really, how do we acquire the capabilities necessary to deliver Zero Trust, which means cross-domain vendor management has to be top of mind as you're acquiring new tools. I know that Maria may not have all the tools she needs, and Jim may think she has too many, but at the end of the day, there are tools out there and they need to work together, which goes back to our first point on open extensibility. And then one thing, as you might imagine, although I'm at Cisco now, I was naval intelligence for a long time, retired out of the Navy. And out of that, we learned that the value of connectedness, as was mentioned earlier, is multifold in terms of how you're trying to accomplish things. But you got to think about then how that data elements are aggregated and what that means overall. So it becomes a much more difficult process to think through, and that's part of the risk management equation. And we know that needs a lot of thought along with policy governance, but not just single pots of data need to be protected. What happens when adversaries begin stitching that data together for the outcome that they're looking for, and what does that mean for our critical infrastructures in particular? So we wanted to give you just a sampling of the findings. Lauren, I'm going to turn it back to you to see if there are any others you want to highlight, and then move on.
I think you did a good job, Steve, and I am so very proud of this group. They have worked so hard in doing all of this, and I love that you kind of ended on the story, Steve, because how we tell the stories about zero trust are really going to set the scene for the rest of what happens in the future here. So, and what's painted as the art of the possible. So with that, I'm going to tee up the use case group who answers part of that story and pushes the notion forward.
Hey, Teddy, I think I can share my screen here. All right. Ken, do you want to get us started?
Yeah, sure. Hey, good afternoon, everyone. My name's Ken Myers. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, Ken.
Great. Okay. So, hey, my name's Ken Myers. I'm with the General Services Administration. Actually, I think it's kind of funny. So I remember when we started this and we're all meeting, and I don't remember anything about wearing a mask, all in person, sitting there in a big room, bunch of people. And now that seems kind of funny being so far in the past when here we are today. Next slide, please.
There it goes.
All right. So the purpose of the use case working group was to document common federal use cases and then analyze them from a zero trust perspective. And I really thought that was the interesting part. Like a lot of people have mentioned today, I mean, zero trust is really changing your perspective on what was once normal in a different fashion. So we looked at it from the perspective of ACT-IAC's phase 1 work, the recently published NIST special publication 800-207, along with the RFI responses, which were great. A lot of information there, awesome participation from the vendors. So our team worked to document 3 to 5 use cases across those zero trust approaches. The target we used was looking at a specific outcome. So what was that agency trying to achieve by ultimately implementing that use case? So the structure that we use is we started with, and you'll see this if you access the use case section on the ACT-IAC website. We started with a narrative, and the narrative explained what the outcome was trying to achieve. So for example, in the first use case about remote application access, what exactly was the outcome the agency was trying to achieve? And then we did a short documentation of what is the traditional approach? How is that being done today? And then we turned that crystal ball around and looked at it from a zero trust approach. So what would have to change from an architecture or capability perspective to really implement that use case from a zero trust approach? Then we documented what were the benefits from the change between traditional and zero trust. And then we ended with where to start. So if an agency wanted to go out and start a pilot, what were some initial steps they could take in implementing that use case? Next slide, please. So critical factors. This was another interesting part of it. So what was kind of common across the use cases that were you could kind of consider like core capabilities. So the first one is using scalability of the internet and the capacity. That's a critical part. A lot of agencies seem to realize with the maximized telework of COVID that your traditional network access capabilities like a VPN concentrators were limited, and they couldn't leverage that scale and capacity that was outside of their control. The second critical factor, which a lot of others have mentioned today, is that integration, that integrated components perspective, in that to really realize some of the benefits that we identify in the use cases, you have to ensure you have an integration, and it's not your architecture isn't siloed in, okay, network stuff over here, identity stuff over here. It's a matter of integrating them all together to realize that kind of cross-pollination of capabilities. Data at rest and in transit encryption, and that's across the entire use case, from when either a person or device, because it is any. If you look at OMB memo 1917, it talks about agencies managing the identities of both people and devices. So it's looking at the encryption at rest and in transit for both people and machines, from when they're authenticating to when they're getting authorized to when they're accessing that data. And then when that data is at rest, making sure it's encrypted no matter where it is, whether if that's in an agency's storage location, or if that's on an employer contractor's device. And that device could be agnostic to a GFE or even a bring your own device, a personal device. The third point is centralized policy enforcement point. It is kind of interesting, like across the use cases, you try to centralize as much as possible, but sometimes depending on the use case, the environment, the specific pieces that might be involved, there may be more than one policy enforcement point, but centralizing capabilities as much as possible. Next slide, please. Scott, is this where you wanted to take over, or am I still doing this one?
If you want to just intro these, and then I'll go through them.
Okay, great. So I mentioned when we first started, so we identified we were shooting for 3 to 5, and we ended up with 6. And the methodology that we used is from speaking to agencies, and I just want to point out, so the Department of Education and the Small Business Administration, great participation from them, and allowing us to talk to them intimately about their zero trust journey and where they see them going as they mature in the space. So we originally were trying to get 3 to 5, keep it small. We want to identify common use cases. So common was, what are the needs across the federal government? There were a good portion of edge use cases. There were use cases that could change depending on what angle you look at it from. But these are the 6 common based on the interviews, the RFI responses, and the vendor presentations we received. They have remote application access that's slightly different from like remote network access. So this is specific to accessing an application, whether that's on an agency network or a cloud service. The second one, digital worker access. So if you think robotic process automation, that is a non-person entity, it's not a human. But all identities on your system need to be identified and authorized to access. Second one, SOC improvements. So Security Operations Center. What kind of improvements can a SOC experience from implementing zero trust architecture? And the last 3 there, container isolation. We're talking about Kubernetes. Machine-to-machine access could be server to server. It could also be what's going into the 6th use case, which is your operational tech and your internet things. So I'll hand it over to Scott to get into the use cases.
Great, thanks, Ken. So my name is Scott Hogue. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm a director at CGI Federal. Currently supporting DHS. I'm kind of in the trenches a little bit. Work on the CDM Defend program. So we're a little bit of the tip of the spear of some of these things. And previously, I was the technical lead on the CDM credential management program, getting a lot of some of this identity infrastructure in place at some of our agency partners there. So as Ken mentioned, the first use case is around remote application access. In a lot of ways, this is kind of the world we've been living in the last year or so. In particular, this is accessing enterprise applications, typically in that it's based on your network location. Are you in the office, or are you in some kind of a extension of that through a VPN? In a zero trust approach, we really kind of break that down and using that internet at scale to provide those security and compliance through a software-defined networking, cloud access brokers, and stuff like that. And we wanted to really highlight with this that it really is important to understand the identity and the access and what those people are allowed to do is really a key capability in being able to go and integrate these components together so that you can go and understand who it is that's authorized to access what applications at what time, and to go and put the controls in place to turn that on and off as needed. The second use case is around digital workers. As Ken mentioned, these are like RPA bots and things like that. And in a lot of cases, those applications will just go off and kind of do those things. And in a zero trust world, we really need to make sure that we're enforcing least privilege on those bots and allowing those unattended digital workers access through identity governance, like you would for regular human accessing the application. And what will be a common theme with a lot of these is implementing some micro-segmentation so that you can go and, again, control those access points throughout the environment. And where we thought you should get started on that is really looking at the digital workers that you have in the environment and doing some risk assessment of those to really, like you would for the people accessing things, what access do they need and what governance needs to happen about that. And then to support that, you have to have an identity and access management system, an identity governance system that can go and credential and manage those digital worker applications, accounts, access credentials, whatever. The third case we looked at was about what does zero trust really bring to the SOC? And, we recognize, SOC analysts are inundated with false positives and just a lot of kind of point information. And what we think the zero trust can really bring to the table here on this is a lot of context around those connections and that log item that's in there, rather than just, hey, some port got hit. We can look at who did that, where did it come from, the vulnerabilities that might be on that system that was there, and all of that context around that flow of traffic. And really the way to go through and do this is you need to bring in this additional contextual sources into your SIM, get that identity information into the SIM, information from your cloud asset management systems and access systems, and provide some more fine-grained information around the devices that are accessing it, the type, the operating source, browser source, destination locations, and information about what those activities are actually doing to get some real additional value out of that. The next use case that we looked at is, as Ken mentioned, around like Kubernetes. We're moving into a much more container-based, air quotes, serverless kind of world where you're providing services in a more broken down and modular kind of manner. And current networks are very highly fragmented with traditional segmentation. I've got a firewall here and a firewall there, and it's all very static. You put in a request to open a firewall port, and that port is open. And so it makes it really hard to react to those threats that we are seeing out there regularly. And so again, I kind of had a theme here that micro-segmentation and some micro-segmentation engines can really bridge that gap here, where we're able to control those connections between points of data access and data manipulation on that. And really where we suggested you get started with that is you got to pilot it. You got to pick an application that you can go do a proof of concept, pick something that you can go and really work with. and lay out those integration points between the different networked access points, the identity components of that, so that you can go and start to implement those dynamic access controls that micro-segmentation gives you. The next one is a similar kind of use case, but we're looking at machine-to-machine access. There's a lot of systems nowadays that are sharing data, transferring data between them. That access as well needs to get a similar kind of control, on top of just, the authentication of providing maybe with an API key or a service account or something like that. And we need to look at the abilities that micro-segmentation can get you by looking at what are the business unit roles that data transfer is making use of or requiring, and the applications and services that is going and trying to get access to. And again, that ties back to, again, at the machine level, even having some identity governance that supports, granular and user-based access to get that precise level of control over all of those data interconnections that we get there. The last case, we extend all this stuff, from the business networks into the operational technology and the IoT space, and recognizing, traditionally IT and OT networks were often air-gapped or may have some kind of a guard between them. And we're seeing a lot of blurring of those lines when you start to implement IoT devices into that. They're, getting to be just very popular. They are proliferating throughout the environments, and the control of those can get really challenging. They show up all over the place. So it really, brings us to leveraging a similar kind of approach as we do with the humans, where those devices have credentials and identities, and you treat them with the same kind of control and governance that you would for a traditional identity. So again, a lot of it comes back to a couple of things. The micro-segmentation and identity governance are really key aspects overall to being able to implement a lot of those kinds of the things we want to get to in Zero Trust. And with that, I think we're going to turn it over to the vendor outreach team and Dave Harris and Jody Cahoot.
Hey, thank you, Scott. Everybody hear me okay?
Yep, you're good.
Great. I'm Dave Harris with the Department of the Interior. I work in the CIO's office as a security architect in our cybersecurity division. I'm joined by Jody Cahoot this afternoon to present on the vendor outreach working group. Of course, we had the three working groups for our phase 2 effort, and I'd like to thank Dan Jacobs just for kicking us off, and what a great program we've had so far. Dan talked about the the phase 1 ACT-IAC Zero Trust effort, and of course what we're briefing out today is the phase 2. And I was thinking about the connective tissue between the phase 1 and the phase 2. And so I recently took a look at our phase 1 white paper, and in the executive summary, what really stood out to me is we said that there is a proliferation and continuation of serious cybersecurity incidents. And thinking about what has transpired in 2020 and 2021 in terms of cyber events, this work that the cyber team is doing with this project is I believe is just so critical. I'm going to share my screen here just real quickly here. And here we go. Presenter mode, F5. Okay, can everybody see my screen?
Yeah, Dave, we get it.
Okay, thank you.
You're still in slideshow mode though. You might want to present if you can.
Yeah, I'm hitting my F5 and it's not taking.
Well, there's the little
Slideshow.
presentation right down at the bottom in the right-hand side next to the slider, just to the left. I think that button maximizes as well.
Reading view? Slideshow. Here we go. Thanks, Dan. You are so awesome.
Well, I think
Okay.
it worked for you, but not for us. So
Oh no, oh no.
maybe I didn't help you. I'm sorry.
Oh no. Well, can you see my screen now? Where it says Zero Trust
Yeah, you had it
RFI?
just for a second though.
Yeah.
It's all right. Let's just continue.
Okay, so you can see my screen, right?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, let's see here. Okay, so the phase 2 effort, we're focusing on the potential for federal agency adoption of zero trust security and modernization of cybersecurity. And for the RFI, so we released it June 1st, 2020. Project team released the RFI through GSA, and thank you, GSA, again, so much. We just can't say how much we appreciate your efforts to support that RFI, because that was really the catalyst for this whole effort. We're looking to do market research in the vendor communities. We reached out to OEMs, system integrators, and telecoms. What was our mission? So we're trying to determine the extent of vendor capabilities in the areas of zero trust architectures, networking, and complementing technologies. And we anticipated the vendors, they'll have products and solutions that could assist the federal government with implementing the principles of zero trust. Okay, so we came up with a methodology to do the analysis on the RFIs received. First, we referenced the responders to the phase 1 effort that the ACT-IAC Zero Trust cyber project team did. What was key in that phase 1 was the identification of what we call zero trust pillars. And that just helped create a common baseline for the responders to respond on. In addition to that, NIST, this just fell into our laps. I mean, we were just so fortunate, so fortuitous. The timing of when they released their draft 800-207 publication on zero trust. I mean, the timing couldn't have been better. Thank you, NIST. Alfred, if you're still out there, please thank all of your colleagues there. That was so helpful in constructing the RFI, because it provides a standard for the responders to describe and talk about their products and provide context for the capability of their products. Of course, we also asked the responders about how their products sort of aligned with DHS's CDM program. And that had been out there for a while. So they were very familiar with that CDM program. And, that just helped provide more clarity on the capabilities for their products. Finally, we asked about how they aligned with the NIST 853 controls. Security controls are, as mentioned during the state panel, the security controls are very important. And so having information on where these products and services aligned with the 853 security controls was tremendously helpful. And we also asked the vendors, hey, give us a couple use cases where your products are kind of in use and where they are sort of integrated with various areas or touch points of zero trust capability. And so all of this information was just so tremendously useful. It helped provide just good material, especially for the other working groups, to analyze, to see where the capabilities were, to see what the use cases, the most viable use cases are going to be. So the results for the RFI. So, we put the RFI out, and at first it was like, is anybody going to respond? It was COVID had kicked in, and we're like a little nervous. And oh my goodness, be careful what you wish for. So, Dan from GSA, so he was pretty much telling us what, first we had a couple of responses trickled in, and then the tsunami hit. We had over 60 vendor responses, and just from a great diverse vendor security capability portfolio, just the whole horizon of, or the whole spectrum of, different security capabilities. We heard back very strong response. We're so thankful to the vendor community for the responses. So now we have this huge tsunami of responses, and we're sitting around looking at each other. Of course, it's COVID, so we're looking through Zoom, right? Well, actually through WebEx. Thank you, Teddy, for giving us the WebEx. And we're like, oh my God, how are we going to go through all of these responses? And Dan in his kickoff told you about that page count that we had when we added up all the pages for this. So the team, we divided up the RFI responses into batches, and everybody kind of volunteered to work on a batch. And you have to remember, this was the summer, and we're in the middle of heavy COVID season. So, we weren't going to the movies, right? We weren't piling in onto the beach. We weren't going on cruises, on cruise ships, and we weren't piling into the ballpark for a baseball game. So what better way than to spend your Saturdays and Sundays than to just stay home and review RFI responses? And that's what the team did. We developed a standardized RFI response template to provide for a repeatable process to do a proper capture and analysis of the vendor zero trust capabilities. So everyone was using sort of the same rubric for evaluation, and then, to get, a common baseline to have understanding on what the vendor responses were. We held weekly cyber project meetings to collaborate and develop the RFI findings. And again, it was just a great response. Hey, Jody, are you there?
I am, Dave, and if you would just continue to work the slides for me over the next couple of minutes, that would be great.
I will. And Jody, please take it away.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jody Kohut, and at the time that I started on this project, I was a Broadcom employee, had been working on the CDM program for a number of years. Today, I'm just an independent consultant, and I thought I'd take a few minutes to lead you through sort of how we can think about the responses that we received and kind of summarize the great work that the vendors did and that this team did to analyze those responses, just by taking you through a view of who responded to what. One way to tell this story here is to let you know how we categorize that spreadsheet Dave mentioned to you. What we were able to do is group the questions into categories: architectural, operational, then the different frameworks like the NIST 853 and the CDM framework, and then finally the use cases. And it became pretty clear early on that we saw a lot different type of response from an OEM vendor than we did from a service provider. And if you think about everything everyone said today, that makes a lot of sense, because service providers are able to more tightly integrate a lot of the different OEM components. So we wanted to be able to just capture whether or not somebody was a service provider or OEM vendor. And you'll see based on this slide that a little bit over 75% of our respondents were OEM vendors, and the rest were service providers. Dave, if you would take us to the next slide. Now that you understand how we categorize these responses, architectural, operational, frameworks, and use cases, I thought I'd take you through kind of a view of who responded to what. So questions 1 and 2 were architectural questions, not who necessarily, I'm sorry, but more percentages. So question 1 and 2 had to do with, hey, what's the architecture look like? And you see that the largest number of responses were in alignment with the phase 1 work, sorry, that we did around what we call the pillars of Zero Trust: users, device, network, automation, and analytics. So the vendors were able to say, hey, I have a solution within one of those pillars, and I'll respond. And in the blue there, you see the frequency of responses on question 1 and 2 versus non-responsiveness. And you'll see that a smaller amount of the vendors were able to kind of categorize their responses at that time along the 800-207 NIST special publication. And I think Dan mentioned this earlier, or somebody in one of the working groups did. Part of that was 800-207 was under development at that point in time. So important to note that. Not a shortcoming necessarily in the vendors. This is just one way to take a look at it. So questions 3 and 4 were more operational, and they dealt with more aspects of the logical design and the operation of Zero Trust together. And if you look at question number 3, it was more along the structural components or logical design. And question number 4 was more along how do you operationalize, there's the word, this and make it work together. And again, you're going to see the frequency of responses here in this chart. And finally, the next group of questions 5 and 6, were along whether or not the vendors could see how they aligned with the CDM framework or the 853 framework. And now that you've taken a look at just sort of like the big view of where the responses lined up, Dave, if you switch to the next slide, one of the things I just want to point you to is the fact that in the artifacts that this working group is going to deliver, you're going to see some great graphics about how these RFIs were responded to. And in this particular depiction, which you'll find in the report, because if your eyes are anything like me, you can't see this chart at this moment, the frequency that somebody said, yes, I have a solution that aligns with this particular aspect of the CDM framework. And this speaks a lot to the stuff that the capabilities group worked on. So in those few minutes, Dave and I walked you through some of the methodology and data that we received from the vendor community. You learned why we took on this initiative, you learned how we approached it, and then you learned a high-level view of who responded to what, to give you a sense of where the vendor community might be at this point in time with their responses. And I wanted to do this to tease out the fact that you should really take a closer look at the deliverables, because they do a really good job of articulating what the work group found as a result of sort of slicing and dicing the data from this particular view. And as industry and government entities are working together to get this common understanding of Zero Trust and how to best implement it, we hope that reading these deliverables will serve you in this important initiative going forward. And with that said, I'll turn you back over to Mr. Teddy Gates.
Thank you so much, Jody. That was fantastic presentation. I want to say thank you to all of our speakers and panelists. We are going to open this up for a little bit of a Q&A here at the end, but I am cognizant of time for everybody. So I will be keeping the meeting open for a little bit over the time so that we can have discussions with anyone that would like. But again, I want to say thank you to everybody. The recording will be provided to everyone that was in attendance, as well as we will get this to Nancy and she can post this up on the ACT-IAC site. On that note, I'm gonna go ahead and end the recording here.